Your story might be the very thing someone needs to hear in order to keep going. Hi, I'm Shara, and you're listening to Life Stories. Hi friends, I hope you're having a great day today. I have another wonderful conversation to share with you. I spoke with Hannah Overton this week. Hannah is a woman whose story you might be familiar with. I wasn't until recently, but in 2006, she was wrongly convicted for murdering her adoptive son. She was eventually, after 7 years in federal prison, exonerated and all charges were dropped and she was declared innocent. But she had to live those 7 years in prison, and we talked about that time of her life and what all she went through and the things that happened, and you will be amazed at her story. I spent a little bit of time at her ministry facility before we did our interview, and she now has a ministry for women who are coming out of prison and who need help. There are things that the women told me in that group that I wouldn't think about. You know, the things that you have to get used to again, or things that are created while you're in prison that you're not familiar with, and how overwhelming it can be. And so she's a very safe place for these women to come and stay, but also she teaches them about life, and they do Bible studies and they do things to encourage and love on these women. And I was honored to be able to go to the class. But Hannah is a woman who carries herself with grace. She is not bitter. She is not angry. She is a forgiving person. I was amazed at her just very calm and peaceful nature. Everywhere I post this conversation, I will post the address to her ministries online. There are ways that you can help without, if you can't give money, you can pray for these women. You can be a part of their notes, encouraging notes ministry. There are items that they need that they take to the prisons to help the women that are there. There's a lot of different ways to help. And so I encourage you to look up what she's doing and help in any way you can. Thanks for listening. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Thank you so much for letting me come here today and for talking to me. And thank you, really, for letting me sit in on the class with those women to see that I think what you're doing for these women is awesome.
It's always an honor to have people join us. And it brings a new perspective to the ladies that they might not know because their struggle's different, know, and it's always really neat to have people join us for classes.
Well, so for people that don't know your story, I will say what I know, because I know a snippet of your whole story, but there's so much more to your story. And so from what I have read is that, was it in 2006 when this happened?
Yes.
Okay, in 2006, you're married, you have 5 children, 5 biological children. Y'all adopted a boy.
Yes.
How long did you have him before he passed away?
5 months.
So not very long.
No.
Did you know him for a long time before then?
Yeah, so my husband and I were in youth ministry at our church, and so we were one of the core members that was there for both services, helping out with all kinds of things in between. And his foster mom used to drop him off at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning and come pick him up at around 2 when the last people left, just so she could get a little bit of a break.
Right.
And so all of us were falling in love with him because he was hanging out with our kids, playing with our kids during in between services, and we were all taking turns just watching. And my pastor and his wife at that time actually considered adopting him, and then they felt like God had said not to. And so then, my kids, actually, my daughters who were in Sunday school with him, came home from church and said, why can't we be his forever family? Because he was asking for a forever family and as a prayer request.
Yeah.
And my husband and I had considered adopting. We we got engaged at a discipleship training school with DTS with YWAM. And while we were there, we had talked about adopting, but we had decided we would probably do it when our kids were older.
Right.
But that's not what ended up happening, because God laid this little boy in our hearts and just put him right in front of us, and we fell in love with him. And so on Mother's Day of 2006, he moved in with us.
Wow.
And he actually came to visit and didn't really want to go home. And he was very quickly calling us mom and dad, and he didn't because he had been in a foster home since he learned how to talk, he didn't really know his middle name or anything like that. And he heard me calling Alicia, one of my daughters, and I'd gotten frustrated with her, and I was like, Alicia Summer Overton, come here. He's like, what's my name? So even before he was adopted officially, he already was like proudly telling everybody his name was Andrew Josiah Overton.
Oh, wow.
And so, unfortunately, he was not able to actually get that name changed. He was 2 weeks away from the adoption being finalized.
Oh, my goodness.
When he went home to be with Jesus.
Had he gotten sick, or is this something that just happened?
So he had quite a few signs of something being wrong, and I had been talking to his CPS workers, his caseworkers, saying, I think we need to get him into a doctor. I see signs of different things, pica specifically, which is a desire to eat inedible items. And so he was like picking things off paint off the walls, and he tore open his brand new mattress we had bought him and was eating the things out of the mattress, and just things like that. Even though he was getting more than enough to eat, he was still had this insatiable hunger for things that weren't even edible. And so that was the specific thing that I kept asking for us to get him in for, but we weren't supposed to take him to the doctor without going through CPS until the adoption was finalized, and they kept putting things off, so he'd never been to the doctor to find out what all was going on. Long story short, he had multiple things wrong with his body, and he died of a rare medical condition called hypernatremia, and it's too much sodium in his body. So he had every sign and symptom of diabetes insipidus, which is different than diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus is sugar, deals with the sugar. Diabetes insipidus deals with the salt in your body. And so the test was never run for it, but he had every symptom that would say that he probably had that. And his some of the tests that they were able to run post-mortem did show that his sodium levels had been high for a long time. But his sodium level went up to a really crazy amount one day, and he ended up passing away from it. And we did rush him to the hospital, but that was a process because we had to ask permission from CPS and try to meet him somewhere, and I was home without a car. My husband had to come home. There was just a lot of different things to get him there. But when we did get him to the hospital, then he was transferred to 2 other hospitals before they even figured out what was wrong with him. At both places, he was giving sodium bicarb, so more sodium was put into his body. So, long story short, he died of this rare medical condition, and because it was high levels of salt in his body, somebody jumped to conclusions, and they had just decided that I must have force-fed him salt, and they went to the house looking for salt. When they couldn't find salt, the only thing that was really high in sodium was some Zatarain seasoning, and so they decided that I must have force-fed him Zatarain seasoning. They calculated what it would take to get his sodium levels that high if he was a healthy child, and it was like 23 tablespoons of Zatarain. So the theory was that maybe 23 tablespoons of Zatarain had been put in a sippy cup, which is not even possible. If you put all that in a sippy cup, it won't come out. There's no way that you can get a 4-year-old to drink that out of a sippy cup. But that was the theory, and so my husband and I were actually both charged with capital murder, and then I was the one that was actually taken to trial and convicted of capital murder in his death before we were able to prove that that is not what happened.
So from the time that he passed away until you were arrested, or how long was that?
I was arrested 13 days later, but then I was bailed out because God is a God of miracles, and $250,000 was brought to our church to bail me out within 24 hours. And so I was bailed out, and then I was it was not until September 7th of the next year. October 3rd is the day that he got sick, so it was until September 7th of the next year when I was actually convicted.
And that was in 2007?
Yes.
Wow. And so like you said before we started talking, it's such a foreign thing to me. Was it a foreign Was prison a foreign thing to you?
Yes, it was completely foreign.
Yeah.
So I was raised at Calvary Commission. I don't know if you've heard anything about Calvary Commission.
We talked about that earlier.
Okay, but I was raised there, and so it's a missions organization. They have missionaries all over the world, but they also do ministry. They also do some prison ministry. At that time, it was only with men. So as a kid, I didn't really have much interaction with that part of the ministry. I did know that they did it, but I didn't have a lot of interaction with that. But I was raised, completely surrounded by a Christian community. I, was raised with stupid being a bad word. I had never seen one adult hit another adult.
Right.
It was complete culture shock for me. I was very, very, very sheltered, and had no idea how sheltered I was. And so yes, prison was a complete different world for me. I had no idea what to do or what was going on around me. Very overwhelmed. But God carried me through that. And for the first 5.5 months after I was convicted, I was put in solitary confinement. And it was for my protection because the media was really bad because it made the story was made out like I had, held him down and force fed him all the salt. And so it was for my protection that I was there. But during that time, I was able to work through a lot of things. It was really, really hard time for me. And I can't imagine. I thought I was going to die of a broken heart. Like I called my husband and told him, I'm not going to live through this. He was like, I'm not trying to kill myself, but I'm not going to live through this because I couldn't keep anything down. I went 5.5 months without eating anything, but I had promised my kids that I would eat because they were getting upset because I was losing so much weight. I had gotten down to 95 pounds. And so I started eating, sucking on M&Ms, peanut M&Ms. And my goal was to try to finish one bag in a day.
Wow.
And I didn't always get there, but that was all I ate because I couldn't keep anything down. And so it was just really hard to eat. I was just so depressed. But you know what? God was with me through that whole time. And, there was a time when I was... my pastor came to see me and I told him, I said, I know God is God and I know he's sovereign, but I don't understand how he could ever love me and let this happen to me. My kids need me. My husband needs me. I'm innocent. He knows I'm innocent. How could he let this happen? If he's God and he loves me, it doesn't make sense. Right. And I was, just mad at God, and I was like, there's no way you could love me and say this or say you love me and do this. And I remember my pastor looking at me and telling me, I don't know what to say, but I do know he loves you. I know he loves you. And I went back to my cell and I was so angry, and I was telling God how unfair everything was, and I was throwing the biggest fit I remember ever throwing in my life.
I think it was deserved.
Throwing things around my cell and telling God how unfair it was, know. And I was like, you told me to do this. Even in adopting Andrew, I remember this is kind of going back a little in the story, but my mom, when we were getting ready to adopt, I was actually pregnant with our fifth when we decided we were going to do it. And then we were going to adopt Andrew, and she went to the church also, so she knew that Andrew was a bit high maintenance because of being in the foster system, and she was like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you really want to bring, somebody with all those issues into your house, and, is it safe? And, being raised on a missions base, I very flippantly said to my mom, the safest place is in the center of God's will.
Oh, wow.
And now I look back on that like, oh my gosh, what? But I very flippantly, I was like, this is what God told me to do. And the safest place is in the center of God's will. But you know what? Today I will still say that, even if it's in the middle of a maximum security prison. Right. It is the safest place to be in the center of God's will. Yeah. And so we'll go back to where I was at, but I was throwing this fit and I was telling God, how unfair it was and just all these things that were not fair about it. My husband's severely dyslexic and had never learned how to pay the bills and all these things. And I was like, how's he going to do it? Our family's going to fall apart. Just had all these different things that I, thought that wouldn't be able to happen without me, and how everybody needed me. And it's really stupid now when I think about it, but I was telling God, this isn't fair. These people need me. And and then I fell asleep saying, like, the last two things that I wanted to say were like that I can't even see the flowers and the birds. And it was just like something, that I threw out there.
Right.
But God heard that. Yeah. And he, in the middle of the night, I was still in Corpus Christi at this time in the county jail. I hadn't been transferred yet. And one of my friends woke up with this intense desire to buy me flowers.
Oh, my goodness.
And she tells her husband, and her husband's like, "You're crazy. She's in the county jail. They're not going to give them to her." Right. And she's like, no, I think it's from God. And he's like, "I think you ate something funny. Go back to sleep." They argued for a while, and he's from like a really nice part of town, and she grew up in the ghetto, and so she wasn't scared to go to the jail in the middle of the night, but he didn't want her going over there in the middle of the night. Right. So in the end, she won the argument because she was insistent that God told her to do it. She went to the store. She bought flowers. She went to the county jail, and she's like, "God, what do you want me to do with these? I can't give them to her. What do you want me to do with these?" Well, I was on the 6th floor, and for the first few months, I had been had a window looking out at the parking lot. Well, that night, they had moved me to a cornered cell with the window that the only thing I could see was the no parking sign. Yeah. And they did that because my church was doing worship in the parking lot a couple nights a week, and they were tired of it, and they had tried to get them kicked off, but it was public property. Right. They couldn't tell them no. Yeah. So they thought if she can't see them, maybe they'll stop. So they moved me over there. Well, when I woke up that morning and I looked down, all I could see was the no parking sign. That is where God told her to put those flowers on the no parking sign. And so I wish that I could say that I was, excited. Now, sometimes when I tell that story, it brings me to tears. Yeah. But at that point where I was emotionally, I said, "God, that's not funny." I was like, "I do not want flowers. I want my babies," right. And I was like, and I still can't see the birds, right? And so very, very quickly after that, I was transferred to the maximum security prison where I would spend the next 7 years of my life. And when I was there, they took me to the dorm where I would be living, right in front of the dorm, there was a rock with a hummingbird painted on it. Oh, my goodness. And I was like, "God."
Not funny again.
Right. It's not funny. This isn't even a real bird, and I'm in real prison now. Right. And I felt like, so I've never heard an audible voice from God before, and never again, but I felt like I heard audibly him say to me, "But you are like that hummingbird." And I was like, what does that mean? But I was so upset. Right. I was being moved into real prison, and then I couldn't stop walking. I'm like, have a guard following me into the dorm, and I'm having this conversation with God in my head while I'm going into the dorm. I walk into the dorm, and there's like people screaming fresh meat and all this craziness, and but I heard God say that. Well, over the next 6 months or so, as I began to heal, I began to look at what could that mean? What is a hummingbird like? And what is, and that became, that if you see our logo for our ministry, it's like hummingbird in some hands. Well, what God showed me was that hummingbirds are very fragile, and they can be crushed. Like if you just close your hand on a hummingbird, its bones are so fragile it'll crush it. But even though the bees get all the glory, the hummingbirds are the ones that, if hummingbirds went extinct, we would not have enough oxygen to live. Wow. Because of their beaks, they carry so much for pollination that it helps to bring enough oxygen for us. And what God told me when I was researching all that was that in my hands, you have a big purpose, like those hummingbirds. But you have to trust me with where you're at and what you're doing. So fast forward a little bit, and I just a few weeks, and I have a job in the laundry. And so at first they put me on this job in what they call the host squad, and that's like what the slaves do in the movies where they're all lined up and they have to cut the grass with an Aggie or a hoe. Yeah. And they have like a guy on a horse with a gun and all that. You see them singing the songs. Well, they still do that in Texas prisons, and that was my job in the beginning. But then I got moved to laundry, and when I got moved to laundry, it was, again, by the grace of God that I got moved to laundry. Nobody gets moved in the first year, but, somebody pulled me, and it was because one of the people that had been there a long time was begging their officer to pull me to that job. And but anyway, when I got into laundry, I was crying every day. I was crying, and you don't cry in prison. You can't let people see your weakness, and that was like really dangerous for me to be crying all the time, and really not a good idea. And so this one lady who was very annoyed by my crying decided she was going to stop it, and she pulled me in the back and she starts cussing me out, and she was a witch.
Oh, wow.
And she was head of the Wiccan circle in the prison. But she said to me, she said, you say you're a Christian and you say you believe in God, but if you believe in God, don't you think that he's big enough to decide where you're supposed to live?
Wow.
And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she's like, you're home and you need to get used to it. And she said, do you get your mail here? I was like, yeah. She said, do you eat here? Yeah. Do you sleep here? Yes. If you lived in an apartment for 3 months, do you think that you would say you were going home at night when you went home to go to bed? Yeah, probably. Well, if you're going to be here at least 3 months, even if somehow God does this major miracle and your case gets overturned, you're going to be here for a while. And you need to realize that this is your home. I'm like, this will never be my home. Start crying again.
Right.
She's like, stop that crying. And she keeps cussing at me, and she's telling me, you need to step up and you need to talk to your God and figure this out. Wow. Because you cannot be walking around here crying all day long. You're going to get yourself hurt. Yeah. And if nobody else beats you up, I'm going to.
Wow.
She was like, I'm sick of it.
Yeah. And
so I went back to my dorm after work that day, and I was so mad. I'm like mad at God because he let this witch tell me this. How dare you? I have the right to be crying. That's what I felt like. Like I had the right to be crying. How dare you not protect me from this mean woman, right?
Right.
And so I go to my dorm and I open up my Bible, and it says in Acts 17, I believe it is, it says, God decides exactly when and where you shall live. And he does this so that you may seek him and find him with your whole heart. And I was like, really, God? I mean, I how dare you?
Again.
But it was so plain, like there was no way around it. It was like exactly what I was talking about. I opened my Bible and it's like, like he was talking to me, and he's like, I decided that this is where you're going to be for now. And you need to realize that this is me and trust me with it. Yeah. And so I was able to, at that point start to begin to trust. It was still a process, and it still took a long time, for me to get there. But I started beginning that, okay, God, if you have a reason for me to be here, what is it? And how can I do it so I can get home?
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And, but the interesting thing is God did not let me leave until it was hard, until my heart was at a place where, I wanted wholeheartedly to be ministering to these women. Yeah. And it was hard to leave them behind in that place. Yeah. And, so over time, God just began to open my heart. And when I first got there, because it was such culture shock, all I could see was, the crimes they had committed and the behavior around me, the language that was being used, the fighting, that stuff. That's all I could see. But God just changed my heart, and I began to see the brokenness that brought people there, and began to realize that, these ladies didn't wake up one day and decide, oh, I'm going to commit a crime and go to prison. Right. Things happened that got them to that place. Right. And, and it's a lot of pain that got them to that place. And, statistics say that 96% of women in Texas prisons are there due to abuse. Wow. That's a huge percentage, and that's the state's that's their statistics. That's not even, somebody inside saying that or whatever. It's what the state says. So, they have been in horrible situations. And the women that committed violent crimes, like most of them, it was to protect their kids or to protect themselves or, somebody, was forcing them to do it or something like that. So anyway, God began to change my heart, and I began to realize that I had a hope that they didn't have. Yeah. Even though when I first met my appellate attorney, she told me that, she said, I will work until I die to prove your innocence.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at your case and I see you are innocent. I believe it wholeheartedly.
Right.
But it's like water on a rock. The average time that it takes when somebody is falsely convicted in Texas, or in the United States, to prove their innocence is 20 years.
Wow.
It's the average time it takes.
This is maybe a dumb question, but why does it take that long?
Because it takes years to get into each court,
and
then the courts don't want the politics on their things, so they like to send it to the next court, because you're going to have to deal with somebody being upset whatever decision you make, and there's usually a whole lot of politics involved.
Okay.
So it just, on average it takes 20 years. When I am going to, like now I go to these Innocence Network conferences with a bunch of exonerees, and they tease me because I'm the baby, because most people, I would say, for the majority of people, it's like over 25 years.
Wow.
And there are just a handful of us. When all the exonerees get together, there are a handful of us that are under 20.
Wow.
And I think I am the baby.
Oh my goodness. I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah. So, God did a huge miracle in getting me out in 7 years. For us, it seemed like eternity.
Yes.
It seemed like the longest time ever. And every time, a court pushed it to the next level or whatever, I would be devastated. I thought it was going to be forever. But I still had a hope that the other ladies didn't have. And that was the big thing that God was showing me, was that, some of these ladies had like a 3-year sentence and they were going to go home, but they didn't have Jesus. And they had nothing, whether they were there or they were home, they were still in prison.
Right.
Because they didn't have that hope. And so I began to share that with a couple of people and started a Bible study called Healed and Set Free inside the dorm, and a couple of people were doing it, and before you knew it, a few more people wanted to join.
Wow.
And then a few more people, and there's a rule in Texas prisons that you can't meet with more than 4 people at a time, because it's considered inciting a riot. So even if I was doing Bible study with them, if there was more than 4 people at the table, we were inciting a riot, and we would have all gotten a disciplinary case for it.
Goodness.
So we had to break up into multiple groups. So I found myself before too long doing Bible studies like every night, and then it was every afternoon, and then the people in the afternoons would do the groups at night that they could learn it and then do it, and then and by the time I left, there were 100 women, a little over 100 women that were doing the Bible studies, and that now has grown to right under 1,000 women.
Wow.
So it might be at 1,000 now, because we've had quite a few new people from our outreach we just did, but I'm not sure if we're there yet.
So do you still go in the prisons? And
I do. I don't go as often as I would like to, because the state of Texas won't allow me to get my volunteer license, or whatever it's called, certificate, because I have so many friends that are still in there. And so until I'm willing to not write them, not call them, not visit them, like there's still multiple people in there that are like family to me that I want to keep up with. And when enough of them get out to that point where I can say that, then I can go in more. Okay. So a lot of times, like when we twice a year we take in we do these big outreaches, and in the summer we take in cooling towels and cups and soap, because there's no air conditioning in the Texas prisons, and people are dying from the heat. And we can't get air conditioning, but we can get a little bit to help them. So we do that in the summer, and then at Christmas time we do hygiene products, and then just something that they can keep, like either chapstick or gloves or socks or something like that. And so when we do those outreaches, what I do is here we put it all together, and then we go to the hotel, and we get all our volunteers ready, and we send that, we help them get into the door, and we take the products to the door, and then we go visit our people while they go in and deliver stuff. So that's kind of how we set it up at this point. But eventually we hope to be able to go in more. But at this point, I don't want to give up the personal connections.
Right. Oh, I totally understand.
That's too important right now. But God's bringing some of them home. Another one's coming home in September.
Wow.
And eventually they'll all be out.
That's amazing for what you're doing when they come out. I just think it's beautiful. So how did you said you had an attorney that was working on your case and she believed you're innocent. How did it come about that they figured out?
So when my case, when I was convicted, my attorneys were devastated. I had multiple attorneys working on my case, and they had given everything that they knew to do it. They were not trying. They did make some mistakes, but they were not purposely made. They really were trying with everything in them to prove my innocence. And they were devastated, and they called Cynthia Orr, who is one of the top defensive lawyers, and she's actually like president of the National Defense Organization now. Yeah. But they called her and they asked her if she would look at the case, and her retainer fee just to get her to look at it is like $250,000.
Oh my goodness.
And so my attorneys actually paid for her to come look at it.
Wow.
And she said that, that she came down and there were like 6 grown men and they were all crying, and she's like, I don't know what to do with this. You don't see, especially men that are attorneys, they're very because part of their job is being like tough. Right.
Yeah.
So for them to be crying and telling her, can you help us? Like, she's like, she said, my heart just broke and I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, I have to look at this case. So she opened it up, and as soon as she could figure it, could look at it, she could see that that I was innocent and that things had been done wrong. And so the big evidence that proved my innocence wasn't uncovered until a few years later. So whenever we first took Andrew to the very first hospital, he was throwing up at the very first hospital. And, I kept saying, where is that throw up? Because they suctioned it. And I thought, if I could prove that,
what was
it would prove that I didn't force feed him anything, right? Yeah. So this is what they're saying happened. And if I could get that, then I could prove that they're lying. And the prosecuting attorney kept telling me I was crazy. She's like, there was no throw up. You're making this up. You're crazy. Well, all along she had this vomit. She had it tested. It showed that his stomach contents were not crazy high in salt.
Wow.
And she had hidden it. She put it like in the back of the evidence room in a paper bag that said Overton's home, so that nobody would see it. Nobody would look at it. It wasn't even with our stuff.
Wow.
It was, and so because of that, later on that was found, and it was like I'd already been in prison like almost 4 years when they found it. And the way that they found it, this is another God story. I don't know how much time I'm taking.
Oh no, you just keep talking.
Okay.
As long as it takes.
Okay, so I was doing Bible studies in the dorm, and there was this lady that started coming to the Bible study that was in a homosexual relationship. Now, inside a women's prison, that's very, very common.
It probably is, yeah.
It's very common because they are in need of comfort and desperate for any attention they can get, and it's just an easy thing that the enemy can throw their way. So, but her girlfriend was scared for her to come to Bible study because she was scared that I was going to tell her she had to break up with her. Oh. And the girlfriend, she was in prison for committing murder, and she had committed murder since she'd been in the prison over jealousy. And she decided she was going to kill me because she didn't want me to take her girlfriend away. And some of my friends, God provided me from the very beginning with a group of friends that took me in. Yeah. They were a bunch of women that had been there over 20 years, and they felt sorry for me because I was so out of place. They took me in, and they took care of me. Lucy that you met today was one of them. Oh, wow. And they just protected me, But they... So my friends got together, they heard the rumor that was going around, and they went to her and they told her, you mess with her, you're messing with us, and you don't want to mess with all of us. And, so she decided that she wasn't going to do anything to me, but she was still mad, so she was going to beat her girlfriend up, and she was going to teach her a lesson not to come to youth or to Bible study anymore.
Yeah.
And I used to be in youth ministry. But anyway, they tried to, told her that she was still planning to hurt her girlfriend. She had stolen a weapon, a screwdriver, from the maintenance crew, and she had this whole plan ready to go. And by the grace of God, they came in and searched our room that day, and they found the screwdriver. And so they took her out and they put her in solitary confinement because she had this weapon, and she was stuck down there for 6 months.
Wow.
Well, when that whole thing happened, I watched as even my friends, even the people that had accepted the Lord, were excited by all the drama. Right. And they were like, it was like the big thing to happen in the dorm. And I was really sad about that. I was like, I don't want to become like these people. It's like the Jerry Springer show in here, and I don't want to become like that. I don't want this to be exciting. This is somebody's life. And I started praying, and I was asking God, like, how do I not become like these people? And I felt like he was telling me that I needed to forgive. And I was like, okay, forgive who? And there,
who are we talking about?
And so there were a lot of people involved in my case. And I felt like God laid on my heart that he wanted me to write a letter to the second chair prosecutor. And I don't know who, I was kind of arguing with God, because I was like, who's she? Like, I don't even hardly know her. I don't know why I really need to forgive her.
Right.
And she did give the closing statement, and she said some really mean things about me in the closing statement. But the rest of the time, she was kind of in the background, and I really didn't, I didn't have a lot of feelings towards her that I knew of. But God knew that, and God is gracious, because he chose, somebody that would that he could teach me about forgiveness with.
Right.
So when I went to actually write the letter, and I was looking at the things that she had said, because I had my transcripts and I was supposed to be memorizing them. So from my attorney, they wanted me to memorize my transcripts for whenever I went back into court, so that I would, make sure that I didn't say anything with different wording where they could twist it and say that I was saying something wrong, or, And so I had my transcripts. I was reading through everything she said, and I was like asking God to help me to forgive her for saying these things. And I realized it was a lot harder than I thought, And so I wrote her this letter, and the letter, talked about how, like Joseph, she may have meant something for evil, but God meant it for good. And I started telling her some of the things that God was doing in the prison, and people that had gotten saved, and lives that had been changed. And then I told her that I had that I was going to forgive her, but the reason I was going to do that was not for her. It was because I was putting her case in a higher court. And just like my case was in a higher court, and I was a little naive about how the system worked, so I thought that once my case was in a higher court, she could have nothing to do with it. But I was like, just like my case is in a higher court, and your hands aren't really on it anymore, I'm going to put your case in a higher court. I'm giving it to God. He knows what happened. He knows where your heart was, and he can deal with you.
Wow.
And I'm going to let it go. Well, I wrote this letter, and then I tore it up.
Yeah.
And then I wrote it again, and then I put it in the back of my box. We had like this 2x2 metal box that all of everything we owned had to be inside of. And I put it in the back of the box, and I left it there. And I argued with God for a couple of weeks about it. I wrote the letter. That's what you told me to do. And he's like, no, I want you to mail that letter. I was like, it won't do any good to mail the letter. They're not going to give a letter to her. They wouldn't, from a convicted felon, quote unquote, they're not going to give a letter to her anyway. And during this 2 weeks that I was arguing with God, I didn't know that in Corpus Christi, the person that was the district attorney got into some trouble and got moved from his position, and they were appointing an interim district attorney, and the governor actually appointed my second chair prosecutor as the district attorney. So then when I find out, my pastor actually came and told me, and I was like, okay, God, I can send it now, because there's no way it's going to get to her. So I'm trying, I think I'm going to outsmart God. Right. I'm going to send the letter, and they'll just send it back to me or whatever. It'll get thrown in the trash. They're not going to give it to the district attorney. Well, the clerk that got it was actually a clerk that had been in my case and really believed I was innocent and wanted to, and so she like walked it to
Oh my goodness.
the district attorney.
Hand delivered it
to her. And the next morning, she actually showed up in my pastor's office in tears. And she said, she had never received a letter like that, and she couldn't believe that I could forgive her. And she said, she told my pastor, she said, I knew from the beginning something was wrong with this case. There were so many things that were done wrong. There were so many, iffy things that were going on where she felt like the first-year prosecutor was hiding things. She said she had even went to the district attorney at the time and tried to say, I feel like something's wrong. And he was like, leave it alone. I don't want to, because my case got a whole lot of media attention. And the last case that had gotten media attention like that was Selena's case. So they, didn't want to let the media go. They wanted to keep the media attention going. So they told her to be quiet. And so anyway, she told my pastor after accepting the Lord in his office, she told him, get your attorney and, whatever, I'm going to open up the office, whatever you can find, you look for it. You can stay as long as you need. You can look through all the work product, whatever, and just see what you can find. Because I know there's something here that will prove her innocence. I don't know what was going on because she kind of held in the background. They didn't let her know what was going on. But she knew it was shady, and so my attorney was able to go into the evidence room and find that, along with a lot of, she had sent emails to doctors saying, why would this be, if she force-fed him and stuff, then this doesn't make any sense. Why would this be like this? And the doctor's saying it wouldn't, she is innocent. This is not what happened so there was lots of emails back and forth. There was lots of other things, and there were multiple other things as well that are just wrong to do in the courtroom. There were quite a few things that that would be technical things, but that was the big issue. That proved all along I'd been saying that I had not done this, and it proved that it was not something I had done, that it was something medically wrong. So anyway, had I not forgiven her and written the letter, I don't know when that door would have been open, or if it would have been open for us to be able to find that, and God used that to open the door in my heart to start forgiving the other people involved, and just to, and as I've seen, people always ask me when I'm interviewed and stuff, well, what's happening with that first-year prosecutor, and she's still an attorney, but she lost her job for the prosecutor, for the district attorney's office, and she lost it due to another case that there were things very shady going on with, and she's an ambulance chase. But, my attorneys would like to pursue her, and we've talked about it. I'm okay with if they want to take her license, but I do not want, they want to use it as to set a precedent to send her to jail for what she did to me, and I don't want her going into jail because I don't trust her safety in there. Also, she's a single mom. I don't want to take her her away from her kid. But everybody that played a part in my conviction, from the CPS workers to the child violence detective, everybody is either there's one of them is on the streets doing drugs, the other one is dead, the other one, they've all lost their jobs, and that's without me fighting to do do that. I had the opportunity, but God took care of it.
God did take care of it,
and he's always good at that. He loves us.
He does. So she obviously found all the stuff, and then how long did it take from that point until you were able to be released?
So unfortunately, we had an evidentiary hearing in 2012, and I really thought I was going to go home then, because all that came out. But my judge didn't want to deal with the political backlash of it, and so he said, I'm not going to make a decision. I'm going to send this up to the appellate courts to look at and let them figure this all out. And that took 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
Or almost 3 years. It was Christmas of 2014. So
wow.
So it was a process, and a pretty long process. But, you know, had I left in 2012, I would have kept up with a few people that had become like family to me, but I would not have started this ministry.
Right.
Like, God didn't let me leave until it was hard, and until He had solidified in our hearts that, like, this ministry and how needed this ministry was.
Right.
You know, and when I left, there were, you know, all of my friends, all the people I was doing Bible study with, like, they were grieving like if I was dying, because they didn't even hear from their mothers, so they didn't expect to hear from me again.
Right.
That was the norm, and it would be the easy thing to do, because you don't want to think about that place. It's horrible. You don't want to, you know, that part of your life, you just want to forget it and move on, you know. But there's such a great need. It's a whole, you know, group of people that are, you know, desperate and need to know the love of Christ. And, you know, God waited until I was at a place where my heart broke for them. And before He let me come home.
And so once they said, I mean, was that it? Was there a process?
There's a process. There is a releasing process. So I was told that my case had been overturned, and it was 40 days from the day I was told that to the day I was moved to the county jail, and then another 7 weeks in county jail before I got out. And during that 7 weeks, the first week they put me in there, they put me in a cell that was covered in feces, and I got really, really sick. I didn't have anything to clean it with or anything, because they don't automatically give you your property. They wait till they go through it, and it took a couple weeks before they went through it. So I had like toilet paper, water, and a cell full of feces. I had to, like, I was trying to clean it up, and I got really, really sick. And I ended up like delirious sick, like I don't remember things.
Goodness.
And so when they found out that I was really sick, because one of the other inmates just happened to be somebody that I had been in prison with before, that had like violated on her parole, and came to check on me and saw how sick I was, she started begging the officers to come and see what was going on, and they realized who I was and that I was sick. And then they were like, oh no, because
we're gonna get in trouble.
She's already been proven innocent, she's supposed to be going home, you know, all these attorneys. And then they like moved me to the infirmary, and I was in the infirmary for a long time, and I was having like IV antibiotics and all this stuff. And I have autoimmune diseases from that, multiple autoimmune issues now from that. So, but it was 7 weeks, and then finally I was able to get out. But then even from there, I got out December of 2014, and it wasn't until April of the next year that my case was completely dropped, and not until May of 2017 when I was declared actually innocent. So it's just a long process, a lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff to get to that point where I was actually declared actually innocent.
So the moment that you found out that your case was overturned, what was going through your mind?
So it was really overwhelming, and it's kind of funny because, like I said, I wasn't able to leave till it was hard. So I looked around at all the people around me, and I started thinking about, like, some of those people might die in there, and how would I be able, like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to see them again, and that was hard. And then I was really scared of going back to the county, because my time in county was really hard, and I didn't know if I was going to be in the county for one day or for a year. There was a couple, another guy, I don't know if you've heard of Anthony Graves, he was proven innocent, but his process of getting out he was almost a year in county. So like, I knew that, and I knew that it could be a long time, and I was really scared of that. And so I had a lot of course I was excited. I was very excited to be able to come home to my babies who were grown up, and scared about that process too, because like, how was I going to interact with them and not see them as 5 instead of 12, or, you know, whatever. And, you know, that transition and how that was going to work. But then also scared about the process of getting there, and sad about leaving. There were so many emotions. It was pretty overwhelming.
I was going to ask how old your kids were whenever you first
So when I was first convicted, my oldest was 8 and my baby was 7 months old.
Wow.
And when I came home, they were 16, or almost 16. He was almost 16, 15, and 8.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that transition like when you came
It was
home?
really hard. So that's part of why we started this school, the
Mm-hmm.
Neo Discipleship School, and it's a transitional home for people coming out. So I had all the help in the world.
Yeah.
I had, people I didn't know that had seen my case on 2020 or whatever that were offering to pay for, psychiatrists. Like I had help, everything that you could ask for as far as help in my transition, but it was still very,
Very hard.
difficult. It was very hard for me. I had been through a lot of trauma, and that I had tried to hide from my family because I didn't want them to have to hurt anymore.
Right.
And then I was traumatized by it. I had PTSD.
Yeah.
I still have PTSD, and I had, having to work through that and having nightmares and being real reactive and things like that. That was really hard. It was hard for the kids that had gotten used to having only one parent at home, and then having all these other church moms that took care of them, to all of a sudden, having a mom home. And I had been promised to be like super mom. All these wonderful ladies in the church that took care of my kids would say, when your mom comes home, she's going to take you to Disney World, and she'll be able to make perfect French braids, and she'll be able, just all these things that, and I mean, their heart was in the right place.
Yes.
And that, but I, then I came home pretty broken, and so it was very difficult. And so, but that was what gave us the heart to do this, this ministry, so that when people come out, they have a safe place to go through all that transition.
Yeah.
And to, work through those things before they try and, be a normal person in society. Because it's really overwhelming. And, just little things like we were talking about earlier, like the soda machine. I mean, I stood in front of one of those soda machines with all the 150 choices or whatever, and I was like, I started crying because there's no button to push. Like, how am I, even if I could make a choice, how am I supposed to show them what choice it is? Because before I left, there was no such thing as touch screen, and so just even that was so much that it made me start crying. And then I ran to the bathroom, and I was just like crying on the bathroom floor, and my friend had to come get me out.
I love what you're doing with these women. And how long did it take once you started this ministry? Like, did you know people right away that could come in, or?
Yes, but we didn't do it quickly like that. So when I first got out, the first year that I was out, I was just continuing the pen pal ministry that my friend had started with people doing the Bible studies. Yeah. And so I just kind of, was working with her and continuing that and helping her, to make that a little bit more productive. And then, as that began to grow and the Bible studies began to grow, I just started praying, because my husband said, I had one prison ministry, and that was to my wife, and you're home now, and it's over. And he's like, you do what you want to do, but... Right. And he's like, but I feel like God's called me to be a pastor. I was like, okay, well, I don't know what God's doing here, but this seems bigger than something I can do without you. And so I just started praying. I'd been home about a year when he came to me, and he said, okay, I think God's telling me that I'm supposed to do this. Wow. And it wasn't long after that that I found out that the property was donated to us by another missions organization, and it was and then money was donated to help to start the ministry. It was just like God just threw everything in place, so there was no way to not do it. Yeah. And so within about a month of him telling me that, he had already quit his job, and we had officially started a 501c3. Wow. And we were doing this. And, so we didn't start having ladies come in, though, until it's been 2 years now. Okay. So for the first 5 years that we were up here, we were just solidifying the ministries that we do inside. We send in Bible studies quarterly, and the encouraging notes that we send in, and then getting the outreaches together and organized better on how we're going to do that. And the property that was donated to us had a house on it that was kind of falling apart, so we had to fix the house and make it livable again. And so all of those things, and getting everything in place. And so then we've just recently, in the last couple of years, opened the door for the ladies to come, and we're doing it kind of slowly. We get applications every week, but we turn down probably more applications. We turn down a lot of them at this point, because we really want the the first ladies to come to be ladies that could possibly, like stay with the ministry and be, staff at some point.
Yeah.
And I mean, not necessarily everyone, but we want to set a foundation for this, and so we're kind of, praying about each one with that in mind.
Right.
The ladies you met today are definitely ladies that will be staying here.
Yeah. Very, very cool. And I think God allows us, I don't know why he allows us to go through certain things, but I know that when he does allow us to go through hard things, we can help the people that I could never help people that you can help, and you may not be able to help people with the thing, you know what I mean? Yes. So I love your heart for these women. I know I have said it multiple times, but I'm honored that I got to just be in there and just listen. Well, you can tell they love each other, and they pick at each other, but that's what sisters do. Right. That's what friends do. Yeah. Y'all are going over the word, and you're going over just life lessons. It's so good. Cool. So good.
Well, we're honored to be able to do it, and it's really, each time that we see God change something in somebody's life, that's another reason why it was worth it, know? And, people ask me if I would have changed it, if I would, I had these few months with Andrew that were priceless.
Yeah.
And each one of these ladies' lives that are doing the Bible study, that are, accepting the Lord, that are doing, their lives are priceless as well.
Right.
And, of course, anybody would choose not to deal with the hard things that we deal with, but I choose to trust that God, God's plans are better.
Yeah.
And, people always ask if, my family has trauma from it. Each one of my kids have some sort of PTSD. I have one that, she sees cop cars and she still gets an immediate migraine and can't drive anymore. She's 21 and she has to wear a bracelet that says why she's pulled over on the side of the road.
Goodness, yeah.
But so we all have trauma from it, but that doesn't mean that God isn't good and God isn't faithful. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have a good plan, and he's using that trauma to help other people. And he has allowed things, but he has carried us through those things.
Yeah.
And he didn't leave us alone with those things. Mm-hmm. He didn't, he gave us what we needed to walk through it and to still be, holding on to him at the end.
So what do you say to someone, even if it was not something like what happened to you, but somebody who is wrongly accused of something and has to go through stuff that they shouldn't have to go through because they didn't do it? What would you say to someone going through that right now?
So the biggest thing I think is knowing that God knows the truth, and it's not about defending your place and your right for them to know the truth. That's so so little in the big picture.
Right.
And I mean, yes, that obviously I wanted to prove my innocence, but proving my innocence is not anything in comparison to all these other things that God is doing.
Right.
And just trusting God with whatever he allows, and really, he is the defender of the weak.
Yeah.
The Bible says he's our defender, and so he will defend us.
Right.
And like I said, all the people that played a part in my, even take, like the CPS workers and stuff like that played a part in my conviction. Every one of them, God has shown himself to be a defender.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that every one of them is in a bad situation, because like the second chair prosecutor, she, accepted his grace, accepted the Lord, and she's still working at the district attorney's office. She's leading a Bible study. I'm still in contact with her.
Wow.
We've become friends.
That's amazing.
It's a completely different thing if they were willing to turn around.
Right.
But if they're not willing to turn around, then God has taken care of that.
Yeah.
And they have received whatever was due,
Wow.
But that's just trusting God that he knows the best way to do that. And he knows better than us.
For everything you've been through, only someone their heart is healed, and you just seem like you are so full of the peace of the Lord. I know it's been a while. I know time has passed, but you just seem so humble and so God's in control. I
God
mean, it's
is in
just
control.
amazing.
God is in
It is
control. And I wouldn't
amazing.
say that I'm completely 100% healed. I don't think I will be until I came out of prison saying, like, I had held on to this hope that I would not even smell like smoke, like
Right.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right.
You know, like I was going to come out, and I remember when I came out and I had PTSD, and it was pretty bad in the beginning, and you know I still do have it today, but I got really upset with God because I was like, well, why did you let them come out and they don't smell like smoke, but I still smell like smoke? And I was talking to my counselor one day, and I had not shared that with her. But I had talked to God about it a lot, but I hadn't shared it with her. And I was just telling her, it's just so unfair how broken I am. Like I really tried, and I really held on to God, and she said, do you mind if I like turn off the counselor button for a minute? And I was like, what? And she's like, I feel like God's telling me to tell you something, but I don't want to overstep.
Right.
But she's like, and I said, if God's telling you to tell me, you need to tell me.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, okay, I feel like God is telling me to tell you that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that the Bible doesn't say that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego liked roasting marshmallows or hung out at the fire,
right?
Or weren't scared whenever they saw guards.
Right, that's true.
The Bible never says that. And when it says that they didn't smell like smoke, it says that what it's saying is that they smelled like the aroma of Christ, because what happened is that the whole nation came to the Lord. So if you're fighting with God about smelling like smoke, you need to understand what that meant.
Yeah.
And are you going to smell like the aroma of Christ, or are you going to choose to smell like smoke?
Wow.
I was like, oh, okay. Because I hadn't said anything to her. I was like, all right, God.
That's awesome.
But that's the thing, like, I still have broken places, but if I can allow those broken places to be used by God, then they can smell like the aroma of Christ.
Right.
That's
beautiful. Hannah, thank you so much
for
talking to me. I'm very honored. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it.